Carl Jung discovered that men who abstained from intimacy for 90 days had such a profound, transformative experience that it altered their view of reality. They reported a supernatural focus and almost magnetic presence that drew others to them, as well as creative breakthroughs that seemed to come from another dimension. But this is what Jung found most disturbing. Most men will never experience this, because they are too afraid of what they might discover about themselves if they stop running from their own minds. Every ancient civilization knew something we have forgotten. The Spartans before battle, the samurai in training, the monks of every religion, and even geniuses like Tesla and Newton, all understood that your most powerful energy can scatter you among 1,000 distractions or focus you on something that makes you virtually unstoppable. Carl Jung spent decades studying this phenomenon. He observed that some people seem to possess an almost supernatural level of focus, creativity, and magnetic presence, while others wander in a constant state of mental fog and emotional chaos. What distinguished these two groups was not intelligence, education, or even talent. Jung discovered that the difference lies in a fundamental principle regarding how we direct our most primal energy. She discovered that when this energy is consciously redirected, rather than unconsciously dispersed, it changes not only what one can accomplish, but also who one becomes on a deeper level. But this is what Jung found most fascinating. This transformation follows a predictable pattern, with specific stages and timelines, which he documented in hundreds of cases. The knowledge exists, the scenario is clear. However, most people will never access this power because they are not willing to pay the price that every warrior, every genius, every spiritual master throughout history has paid. In this video, you'll discover Jung's precise plan for redirecting that energy. I'll show you the 3 brutal phases every man faces and why most give up before experiencing true transformation. You'll discover what separates men who achieve extraordinary focus and presence from those who remain trapped in a cycle of distraction and mediocrity. Ultimately, you'll have the script, but whether you use it or not is up to you. There's a change that no one warns men about. It's not accompanied by a dramatic announcement or a great inner awakening. It happens in silence. When the pursuit of sex suddenly stops, whether by intention, rejection, or exhaustion, it doesn't create peace. A void is created. This void is disconcerting. One might expect clarity or calm, but what arrives is a strange feeling of weightlessness. Without the pursuit, the seductive messages, the validation, the temptation of anticipation, time drags on. The days seem different. There are no rewards to aspire to, no goals to focus one's energy on. And at that moment, the rhythm that kept him moving begins to break. It's the first silence after years of noise, not an external noise, but the constant hum of sexual orientation, subtle, silent, omnipresent. It shaped his thoughts, his movements, and even the way he dressed or entered a room. When it disappears, the mechanism slows down, and that's when we perceive stillness. Carl Jung spoke of libido as something more than sex. It's a psychic energy, and when this energy ceases to express itself externally, man begins to feel it accumulating with no outlet. But this is not yet a transformation. It is only a threshold, a psychological pause. What happens next depends on what a man does with the silence. Most try to escape it. Few have the courage to stay in it. When the sexual rhythm disappears, it's not the body that breaks first. It's the personality, the social self, the projected mask a man has worn for so long that he's forgotten it was an act. For years, even decades, this mask has been shaped by the quest for attraction, desire, and the chosen one. Without this dynamic, the ego begins to crumble. At first glance, this collapse doesn't seem dramatic. There's no explosion, no visible collapse. It's quieter than that. It's the sudden discomfort felt when faced with one's own clothes, realizing that the jokes one used to tell don't resonate as much as they used to. The emptiness in a mirror that once reflected someone one loved. Jung conceived of personality as something necessary, a bridge between oneself and society. But he also warned against excessive identification with it, for once that mask becomes the person, any threat makes them horrific. And when sex disappears, that identity begins to deteriorate. The man no longer receives the same looks. He no longer performs the same rituals. The validation circuit breaks down. That's when many men panic. They begin to cling to their old habits, their old affairs, their quick fixes, anything to keep the mask on. But for the conscious man, this collapse isn't a failure. It's a revelation. This shows him how much his identity depended on desire. And in this raw space, he is confronted with a deeper question. Who am I when I am no longer chosen? As soon as the mask begins to crack, the symptoms arise suddenly, violently and unashamedly. They are illogical, unashamed. They strike as a lack, because that is exactly what they are. For many men, sex has never been anything more than a means of release. It was a form of regulation, dopamine management, emotional distraction, a way to feel desirable without feeling vulnerable. When that ends, the nervous system doesn't adapt calmly. It rebels, anger takes over. Outbursts that lash out at others for no reason. The feeling that the world owes you something and no one is giving it to you. But beneath that anger lies something worse, an emptiness. Not poetic, but cold. The day seems slow. Motivation fades. Nothing is exciting anymore. It's not exactly depression, but it's close. It's the moment the mind realizes its favorite drugs. Attention, excitement, and approval aren't coming back. Then come the desires, not only sexual, but also those for the little rituals that surround it. The movement, the fantasies, the flirting, the spectacle. These desires are not lascivious. They are driven by the desire for control. The mind wants to take back its power. It wants to escape the silence, to restart the old cycle, to feel something, anything familiar. Carl Jung might call this the return of the shadow. The darkest and most rejected parts of the psyche emerge, not to torment but to be integrated. But integration only begins when the individual stops seeking the old solution and begins to face the discomfort as it is, a sign that true transformation has not yet begun, but is yet to come. When distractions disappear, what remains is not peace but exposure. Most men believe they avoid desire by living without sex, but abstinence doesn't kill desire. It brings it out of the shadows, and once it's no longer exercised, it begins to transform, becoming rawer, more honest, and far more dangerous. This is where a man meets the beast within. It is neither a monster nor a villain, but a part of himself he has spent years trying to control or deny. Lust is not just desire. It is linked to power, yearning, and repressed shame. And when it emerges without a physical outlet, it reveals the fractures in a man's identity. Who is he without conquest, without affirmation, without that slight thrill of being desired? Lust is accompanied by fear, not of others, but of what is growing inside him. The fear of losing control. Fear of what abstinence might reveal. Fear that without sex he is nothing. And beneath that fear lies the deepest wound, a fractured masculinity. The man realizes that much of what he called strength was merely a socially rewarded performance. But the power he thought he held depended on his visibility, not his true sovereignty. Jung's shadow is not evil. It is an unclaimed power. And to claim it, a man must first stop pretending to be composed only of strength and virtue. This is where integration begins, not by repressing these impulses, but by naming them, owning them, and refusing to give in. At first, solitude seems silent, but over time it begins to speak. Most people believe that solitude can make them stronger. They confuse solitude with freedom. But when abstinence persists and external affirmations fade, another form of solitude appears. A solitude that refers not to the absence of others, but to the absence of oneself. That's when the mirror appears. Not the physical mirror, but the psychological one. The one that reflects all the questions he spent years avoiding. What do I really want? Who am I when no one is watching? Have I built a real life or just a reactive one? Without sex, without flirting, without the distractions of self-centered validation, a man begins to see himself not as an artist, not as a provider, not as a protector, but as a person. And often he doesn't like what he sees. Ambition seems empty, strength performative, personality patched together by expectations and survival. It's not failure, it's exposure. Carl Jung wrote that loneliness comes not from the absence of people, but from the inability to communicate the things that seem important. In this silence, a man realizes he's never expressed these things to himself. This is the turning point, because only by confronting this raw, unseen, and uncomfortable reflection can a more authentic form emerge. When a man interrupts sex, the silence doesn't just reveal weakness. It provokes rebellion. At first, the body shuts down. No more desire, no more fire, but over time, something older awakens. Not an emotional need, but instinct. The primal force buried beneath years of social refinement, discipline, and moral structure. It doesn't ask politely, it growls. That's when abstinence becomes dangerous, not for others, but for the person himself. For the image he had of himself, protected as he was, calm, serene, and rational, begins to crumble. Hunger returns, but not just for sex, for risk, for danger, for the thrill of being alive. It's not a regression, it's a confrontation. Civilized man finds the buried animal and realizes that for years he hadn't transcended his instincts. He had anesthetized them. Jung warned that everything unconscious would emerge as destiny. Repressed desire doesn't go away. It mutates. It seeps into moods, sabotages relationships, hijacks thoughts. But when confronted consciously, it becomes fuel. The inner rebel doesn't want chaos. It wants truth. It wants power saved from shame. And abstinence, if endured, becomes the test by which a person learns to possess that power without being possessed by it. Not all men survive this phase. The weak relapse, the strong restructure. The energy does not disappear. It simply stops seeking what does not satisfy it. What we call sexual energy is merely the expression of something deeper. Libido, in the Jungian sense, is a psychic force, pure vitality, the will to expand, to construct and to penetrate reality itself. When a man stops wasting his time in the cycle of desire and liberation, he doesn't disappear. He becomes restless. This restlessness is sacred. At first it is unbearable. He wants to return, to find relief, to lighten his burden. But if he resists the fall, something falls into place. He begins to see possibilities where he least expected them. The discipline to finish what he started. The desire to build something lasting. The courage to face difficulty rather than ease. This is transmutation. Sex was never the true goal. It was a shortcut. The goal was intensity, creation, conquest, recognition, transcendence. Sex offered insight. Purpose brings permanence. Then we begin to reconnect. The energy that once sought bodies is now the engine of structure, projects, training, creation, legacy. Jung wrote, "The greatest burden a child has to carry is the unlived life of his parents." A man who fails to redirect his libido ends up living in the shadows, never completely ruined, but never fully alive. But he who learns to direct this fire inward becomes dangerous in the best sense of the word. He is no longer limited to abstinence. He's building something no orgasm could ever give him. Immortality through impact. When a man stops wasting his energy chasing women, something radical happens. He begins to build. Sublimation, according to Jungian, isn't repression. It's refinement. It's the process of channeling the baser impulses, sex, anger, and hunger into higher forms. Art, leadership, discipline, vision. The same fire that once consumed him now becomes fuel. But only if he has the courage to contain it. Most men never succeed. They lean in, yearn, pursue, break free. Pleasure becomes their ceiling. But the few who resist this pull, who face temptation without hesitation, access another power. Not power over others, but power over oneself. This is the foundation of every empire. Not just that of land or capital, but that of character, clarity, and domination. History does not remember men for what they consumed. It remembers them for what they built. And the project always begins the same way, by refraining from the trivial obsession with the essential. Imagine you're creating chaos. The impulse that once drove you to distraction is now the current that fuels your strategy. The tension doesn't disappear, but intensifies. It guides you with every passing hour. It makes your decisions clearer, your instincts quicker, your presence more intense. This is why focused men become dangerous. For those who learn to sublimate, no longer seek pleasure. They master reality. And when that happens, everything tilts in their favor, not the other way around. There comes a time when the storm passes. After the desires, after the fury, after the work of the shadows, there remains only order, but not the order imposed from outside. It is conquered, acquired through struggle, and reconquered. At this stage, discipline is not just a habit or a routine. It is a form of sovereignty. This means that man no longer negotiates with his lower nature. He no longer needs to fight lust or beg for attention. He acts simply because his energy is now linked to something higher. Before abstinence, control was perceived as a burden, a cage. But after enduring the fire, discipline transforms into freedom. Not because the temptation is gone, but because it no longer has a hold. Man perceives it for what it is, noise, and the noise no longer dictates his rhythm. That's when he stops giving in to his impulses. The fire is still there, but it now burns on its own terms. It is no longer reactive, no longer volatile, no longer at the mercy of impulses. It is structured. There is order, there is direction, and every act of discipline reinforces this identity. Jung said, "In all chaos there is a cosmos. In all disorder a secret order." This is what abstinence reveals, not just restriction, but man capable of living without constant stimulation. When he is controlled, he controls his time, his decisions, his future. And this control doesn't just transform him, it terrorizes everything that once controlled him. Desire never dies. That's the lie most men cling to when they try to kill it. But dominating one's urges isn't about hunger. It's about separation. The man who becomes sovereign doesn't stop desiring. He simply refuses to be ruled by his desires. It's a different kind of power, one born not of denial but of lucidity. It can contemplate beauty without flinching. It can feel desire without obeying it, for it now knows the difference between choice and compulsion. Addiction occurs when desire becomes God. When a man begins to believe that without it, without the thrill, the touch, the euphoria, he is empty. But abstinence reveals the deepest truth. He is not empty. He is distracted. Beneath the noise of desire, a will waits to be tested, and now he is in control. The sovereign man is not ashamed of his sexual appetite. He studies it. He knows what triggers it, what distorts it, and when to let it speak. But he does not let himself be dominated by it. That is the real change. It is not abstinence as martyrdom. It is abstinence as mastery. An unspoken contract with oneself that says, "I want but I wait. I feel but I choose." Carl Jung called this individuation. The moment when a person is no longer possessed by their desires, but possesses themselves. It is the moment when desire is still alive, but is no longer their servant. There's a difference between a man who craves attention and a man who demands it. One seeks external validation. The other says nothing, yet everything around him changes. This is male magnetism based on silence. When a man abandons his constant sexual quest, something strange happens. He remains motionless but not passive. His energy no longer escapes. It consolidates. It intensifies. He stops chasing. And this absence of need becomes presence. Women sense this even before he speaks, because what they perceive is not charm but restraint. Most men seek to seduce through their actions, their words, their status, and their gestures. But the sovereign man doesn't project. He radiates. His restraint isn't repression. It's selection. He could move, but he doesn't. He could speak, but he waits. This tension, this control, is precisely what attracts others. It's the kind of strength you can't fake. It emerges only after you've eliminated the need for applause, affection, and approval. It's not that he doesn't desire connection. He simply doesn't need it to feel complete. This distinction changes everything. Carl Jung spoke of anima and animus, the unconscious feminine in men, the masculine in women. When a man distances himself from his compulsive sexual desires, the polarity becomes more pronounced. He's not overdoing it anymore. He's putting down roots, and in doing so, he draws everything else to him. It's this attraction a woman can't explain. Not because she's trying, but because she doesn't. Self-control begins when a man stops outsourcing control of his time, body, and mind. Gone are the compulsive impulses that guide his decisions. Enough feigning helplessness in the face of your appetites. Here is the return to the inner throne. Most men never sit there. They wander their entire lives, ruled by their desires, their distractions, and the roles they have inherited without question. They confuse control with conquest, but to dominate the world, a man must first dominate himself. The throne is not about domination. It is about inner authority. It is when a man's mind ceases to disturb him, when emotion no longer overpowers his decisions, When he is no longer in conflict with his instincts, but also not enslaved by them, here reigns peace, not numbness, not boredom. And in that calm, a different clarity emerges. Not clarity of answers, but clarity of guidance. He knows who he is, where he is, and what he serves. Jung would call this the integration of self, the union of shadow, ego, and spirit. This does not make a man perfect. It makes him whole. The man on the inner throne does not react. He decides. He does not seek control. He embodies it. He is no longer the child asking for permission. He is the man giving it. And from then on, everything he does emanates from the center. Jung never advocated permanent abstinence for everyone. Rather, he considered periods of conscious abstinence essential to psychological development, like a musician who must master silence to truly understand sound. The goal isn't to permanently eliminate sexuality from one's life, but rather to develop a conscious relationship with it, choosing when, how, and with whom to express this energy, rather than being guided by an unconscious compulsion. When one finally returns to physical intimacy, after a period of conscious abstinence, Jung noted, the experience is qualitatively different. It becomes an expression of consciousness rather than an escape, a connection rather than a consumption, a creation rather than a depletion. Carl Jung understood something our culture has forgotten. Our relationship to sexual energy is our relationship to the life force itself. By consciously directing this energy, we do not diminish ourselves, we discover ourselves. The title of this video suggests that when the body is silent, the soul speaks. I would argue that it's not that the soul was silent before, but that we couldn't hear it because of the noise of unconscious desire. Practicing abstinence consciously and temporarily creates the inner stillness necessary to hear your deepest voice, the one that recognizes your true purpose, your authentic desires, your true power. And this can only happen if abstinence is consciously chosen, not imposed by shame or fear. As Jung wrote, your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outward dreams, who looks inward awakens. The question is not whether you should practice abstinence, but whether you are ready to discover what emerges when you stop running away from yourself and start running toward who you were meant to be. If this exploration of Jung's insights has interested you, consider areas of your life that could benefit from conscious mastery and energetic reorientation. Remember, this isn't about deprivation. It's about transformation. Let me know in the comments what aspects of Jung's psychology you'd like us to explore next. And if you found this video helpful, please subscribe to learn more about the profound wisdom of depth psychology.